In 2019, Justin Trudeau said that the way Canada treated Indigenous women amounted to a genocide. 7 years later, in Montreal, a group of international experts are being asked to consider that genocide more broadly. From May 25th to 29th, the Daphne Arts Centre played host to the Permanent Peoples Tribunal. It's an international human rights body that's been around since the 1970s, a permanent court of opinion that hears cases of state violence, colonization, and genocide when other bodies won't. In this case, the focus was on three broad areas: disappeared and missing children, unmarked graves, and forced sterilizations. Now, we're filming this before a preliminary decision has been reached, but it's likely this panel will issue a finding of genocide, as the tribunal has before. But what is going to come from that decision? And why relive these stories? Why unearth these traumas when Canada has seen commission after commission, report after report, long fought for settlement after settlement, and still survivors say the underlying system doesn't change? Let's talk about it.
None of this is binding, right? The People's Tribunal probably won't materially change anything, so why do it?
Yeah, that is a good question. And that's the kind of question that journalists were asking the folks at the Native Women's Shelter. This is the organization that called for the People's Tribunal, supported by some other NGOs. I talked to Nakazet, who's the director there, and she said she was fed up that we've had these other commissions, we've had these reports, like, we know this stuff. But at the same time, people who are Indigenous, whether they're survivors or allies or just affected by the traumatic events that happen in this country, people are saying, like, there's not enough change. And to be fair to her, there's a lot to back this up. Like, we had the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which ended in 2015. There were 94 calls to action. And according to groups that track this, only about 15 of those were ever actually seen through. And in Toronto, there's the Yellowhead Institute. This is an Indigenous think tank at TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University. They actually stopped tracking the progress back in 2023 because they just said, like, there's no point. It's so slow. We are doing these reports year after year, and like, we're kind of wasting paper. We're wasting ink here. There's the Vienne Commission here in Quebec.
Yeah.
It's about systemic racism in Indigenous people's access to public services. There was a report last year that basically said, like, there's not enough buy-in from the government here to actually make the kind of change that's needed to implement these calls to action. The missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, it's just like the same stuff there. It's not calls to action. It's, I think, calls for justice. But again, the government will say, we've made this much progress. I think they say like 136 of the calls for justice we've made progress on. But then you get outside observers saying, well, you only actually finished 2 of those. Yeah. And the progress you're talking about, I mean, in some cases, it's minimal. It's less than you guys are saying.
Yeah. You've opened the file. You've looked at the file. Technically, that's progress.
Oh my gosh, and we have a guest here.
Yes, we have a guest cat. Who
awesome.
Well, he knows when things are heavy to come by and be
and lighten the mood a little bit. Yeah,
lighten it just a bit. Something that, like, 11 years ago when Trudeau was elected and Big Bad Stephen Harper was sent back into the political wilderness, I remember a real, like, there were even some Indigenous communities that were like, I don't generally vote, but I might vote for this guy. There was such a message of hope. And then you saw, like, a lot of kind of purely symbolic, like, there were real changes, right? The promise to finally resolve access to clean drinking water, although I believe he promised he would solve it in 1 year, and it's been 11 and it isn't fully solved yet.
What's up with that?
Well, let's just not talk about it, okay? I think that's we'll do the land acknowledgement, but we're not going to do anything about the land acknowledgement. Like, I want to say that this land, it's like we're looking for this, like, if we say the right words in the right order, we'll be fine. But if we actually have to make any kind of material concession, or if we have to give anything up or do any real work, then, like, no, we don't want to do it. Like, why?
Yeah, to be fair, people will always say, well, there were billions in settlements, right?
Yeah.
And so there is a kind of side of the population that's saying, like, why are you asking for more?
Yeah.
Like, the commissions have been done, the work has been done. And on the other side, you go to something like the Permanent Peoples Tribunal where, I just stopped by on Monday morning. I didn't stay for the whole 4 or 5 days. But, what you're hearing from the people there is like, well, the work is just starting.
Yes.
And what's interesting to me is I think there's kind of a broad-based consensus that the TRC created in Canada, but then everything from that point has been fractured a little bit, where it's like, okay, we did reconciliation, this is what it looked like, or it's ongoing, we have a vision for it, and there's going to be people who are saying we push for more. Now, with this kind of exercise where it is a court of opinion, it's not a court of law, it's not tied to any state, it's not tied to an international court, it is civilian, right? Like, there's only so much they can do.
One of the things that, I guess we shouldn't be surprised by it, but it is so strong, is the backlash against the idea that so many children died while in the not only the, you could start with residential schools, the residential school system, but you see it with the 60 scoop survivors. Naguset is a 60 scoop survivor. And you see it with kids in foster care today. Like, there are conditions that are killing these kids. They're dying in care. Their lives are so much worse than had they not been in care. And it seems like people are trying to use something like, well, there wasn't one giant mass grave with a bunch of bones and like a note from the government that says we did this. Well, until that has happened or been found, then none of this is real. What's your sense of what's energizing that movement and how widespread that movement is?
I think you know better than me, Chris, because you covered this kind of stuff more, and you actually covered the TRC, right?
I did,
back in the day, yeah. I do want to say it's something that I think there's a lot of kind of nuance to it, because there was a National Post article that came out this week. The headline was 5 years after Kamloops grave announcement, not a single confirmed burial site has been found. Here's what we know. And it's going over, some of these GPR, ground penetrating radar cases where they said, look, this looks like there are a bunch of graves that were unmarked outside of an Indian residential school. And what the article is saying is basically like, well, these graves were never unearthed. They were never dug up. So the tone of it, the underlying tone, really does read to me as casting doubt.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because they'll say things like, well, the initial reporting talked about mass graves, but there weren't mass graves. There was a mass of individual graves. Yeah. And that's true, but it's kind of like, okay, is it really like...
Is that the point? Why are we splitting hairs over the wording of it when the reality is, I believe the number is at least 4,000 children died during the residential school.
Yeah, I think era. The TRC said something like they estimated like 6,000. Yeah. But, in my world, I don't really know anybody who envisions it as a mass grave.
Yeah.
I don't know what the importance of that is in shaping the narrative. But the article itself is really interesting because at the end they say, Indian residential schools, they caused all these harms, and they quote survivors and they talk about the sexual abuse and stuff like that. But it's just interesting, I think, this place we're in the dialogue where it's like, okay, that reconciliation era, I don't know, to what extent is it just like over and dead? And what has come after, which is a sort of acknowledgement of the facts on the ground that the TRC produced, but then it's like this discursive war for what comes next, right?
Yeah.
Is it going to be reparations? Is it going to be this funding that is looking for more grave sites that people are critiquing the way it's being spent by nations, whereas the nations are saying like, we're afraid of this funding going away in the next few years.
Yeah.
We've heard that it might sunset soon. And it's just like, it's interesting because, so I almost wish that the PPT had more eyes on it. And
the tribunal.
Yeah. Because it's like, you can watch the live stream, but there's no recordings of the full sessions that are saved. So you kind of have to be there or watch it. It's a limited room. It's a small place in the Mile End. It's like an art gallery. And, when these citizen tribunals were really kind of potent is when they were getting society's eyes on them. Like, there was a tribunal by Bertrand Russell, this analytic philosopher who I believe was at Oxford, who came with Jean-Paul Sartre and de Beauvoir and like did this tribunal on the Vietnam War that got all this media attention. So in the past, these kinds of tribunals they've been spectacular, and maybe there's a sense of like not wanting to bring spectacle to something that is like so serious and grave. We're talking about genocide here, right? Like that is what they're trying to get the tribunal to declare, is that there was an intent to destroy by the state actor of Canada. And it just, it makes me wonder, like, okay, if we get this decision, right, where is it going to go from there? Canada has said we are not participating. Yeah. And to an extent, you can kind of understand, like, they don't want to give up their sovereignty over the process here. It's like we decide when there's commissions and when there's tribunals or international courts, something that states are privy to. It's reputationally, perhaps they fear, more harmful for them to mount a defense of something that is indefensible.
Yeah.
So right now at the PPT, there's this empty chair that is symbolizing their absence. And it's like that empty chair is a really powerful symbolic gesture. Like it shows something, I think, that a lot of Indigenous people feel, like the state is absent here. No matter what they say, no matter what they do, the state is absent. But it's like, who is seeing that, right? Yeah. Like, who knows that chair is empty and what that means? And I want to hear from you, because I know you did so much reporting. You've done so much reporting. The rover has gone to small communities. You were there for the TRC. Like, is this your sense of like actually talking to people in the community that they feel this way as well? Or is there maybe more diversity of opinion than the way I'm presenting it?
Well, I mean, you have so many cases of, like, each case is individual, right? There's patterns that emerge, but everyone's going to have a different reaction to how they want to heal, or how they want to have what they went through recognized. But I think the takeaway I got, like, when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came to Montreal in 2013, I was at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel, and I followed up, and I've done a lot of work with survivors over the years, and it's all different, right? The experiences there are similarities, but everyone kind of has their own baggage. And, like, I mean, there are people to this day who, like, when they go to sleep at night, they remember, like, one person I know, they saw another kid just get killed in front of them and buried. They lost a sibling to another who's at another residential school. They died. Body was never returned home. It's a wound that'll never ever get closed, and it's a wound that gets passed down to your children and their children. And I think a big part of it is they don't want symbolic they want, like, recognition, and they don't want it to feel like it's a box that's being checked off and then relegated to history, because to everyone who's experienced it and their children, this is something that lives in your body, or this is something that, because of an absence in your life, or because of, like, it's that too. And what I've seen from the kind of denialist movement, the John Kays of the world, is that it's a kind of, I think the survivors that I've spoken to, when you talk to them about that, it's like they almost take the people who deny it almost take like a sick joy, or like, I gotcha, like, see, there wasn't one mass grave, so therefore this whole thing, like, it's like they're looking for a loophole that they can hang their hat on and say, see, Canada's not that bad. And it's this weird thing where they can't, I'm sorry, I'm going on and on because I have, like, a lot of thoughts about this, but it's like a lot of Canadians can't, when you criticize the country and the country's history and the country's founders, it's like you're personally criticizing those people. And it's like their identity is so linked to this thing that, like, we all want something that's larger than ourselves in this world. And when you show people the truth, it kind of shatters that image and that thing that they believe in, and you get such a visceral response. And I think people, like, oh man, I haven't even come close to answering your question, but
well, no, but it's interesting because it's like, I think nobody likes to feel shame, right? Yeah. And what I find interesting on the that side of it, right? Those people will look and they'll point at kind of settler allies about, like, they'll find people who engage and over-engage in the rhetoric of reconciliation, land acknowledgements, things like that. They'll say, that's ridiculous. And, I think we also have to take that side of it seriously. Is like, they're saying this performative aspect of it is ridiculous. It's a bit ridiculous. It's a bit necessary. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle. Yeah. Like, it's anybody's guess, right?
Well, I've heard someone say, look, I appreciate the thought behind it. I appreciate the idea that, like, you want to take a moment and say, this is history. But it is performative. And it is like, I want to take a moment to recognize that this is happening on unceded Haudenosaunee territory. And it's like the next sentence is always like, but I'm not going to do anything about it. I've said it. That's all I need to do. I've checked off that box. We can relegate it to the past and move towards the future and build pipelines and, and everybody's happy and it'll be fine.
But do you think if they changed the rhetoric and said, like, well, actually Canada is about, like, redress. It is about building better together, It's all these things. That's what the flag means. The flag means, like, everybody is included. Everybody has this quality of life. Like, I think you could build a broad-based movement around that. I actually think you maybe need to if you're a politician. Like, it's kind of like do or die, right? Because nihilism and guilt and shame are not going to win you any votes. Like, it's just not a winning strategy. And maybe that's part of the reason why these things get sidelined, or just that they're very difficult, intractable, multifaceted problems. But also, even talking about them in that way is just like, okay, it's defeatist and it's not true. But then it's like, you listen to people's testimony at this tribunal. I listened in to a panel on forced sterilizations, and it's like extremely heartbreaking stuff. There was a new report that came out just this week in Quebec that said, like, okay, there is a marked disparity between the way that Indigenous and non-Indigenous women are treated in the healthcare system, and especially, like, in giving birth. And they said there's a power imbalance between these Indigenous women and healthcare providers, so that it's impossible for these women to give free, prior, and informed consent. They talked about, like, women who gave consent 2 days later after having their tubes tied. In this panel, there were women who were saying, like, it happened. The doctors told me it was reversible. Some gave consent, some didn't, right? But they were lied to. And then it's this trauma that they continue with. Like, one woman was saying that she kept having dreams or feeling like she was pregnant, right? This was like for over a year after this happened, because her mind and her body just couldn't accept what had happened to her. And, it's like, I think I have a hard time thinking of, like, truly anybody who hears that kind of stuff, who is able to say, you're lying, that didn't happen to you, you're wrong, right? It's hard to do. So I don't really know what the answer is here. I think it's tricky, because the exercise of having a tribunal like this, it raises a lot of questions, right? It's like, who do you want to listen, and to what? And, it's a balance that I think the people behind it weighed very strongly, of, like, getting people to air their trauma and their testimonies. I mean, I talked to a guy who was an Indian residential school survivor. He says that he was sexually assaulted there by 2 men, but he also said, like, this is my opportunity to share, to help others, to show a story of healing. Like, he said it's valuable to take part in this, right? So, there's going to be some report, there's going to be the decision that gets rendered, and maybe you look at that and you say, this is just one more document. Like, the TRC was 5 years, this thing is 5 days. Like, there's obviously a different scale here. But from what I understand from the people who are taking part, who are putting this on, it's like, you're at the end of your rope. You're trying whatever you can to get people's eyes on this, because it's like, the journalists will pay attention when there's a new report. But I mean, you would know better than anybody, like, having worked in mainstream media, like a big post media paper and now running your own outlet. It's like the media craves newness.
Yeah.
And what do you do with a story that just keeps going and going and going?
And you become, weirdly, the audience becomes desensitized to it. Like you hear enough of these stories and it's weird. You can kind of like, you get a little numb to it. And that's frightening.
And it's like, it's built into the media itself, right? Your editor will say something like, oh, well, if this didn't happen, like, exactly. Are people going to care?
Maybe we're not going to do another story about this. There's not many developments. It's still just poor, shitty, whatever.
Yeah.
The word genocide, I think people struggle with it because we think it has to be the Holocaust, or it has to be something where it's just very clear, it's systematic, it's irrefutable. But I think when we talk about, there is a clear definition of genocide, and there's like elements of it that I think if you look at Canada, you can't deny that this has happened. So I don't know if you can run through some of the like what are the benchmarks, or what has to happen for you to say, okay, well, a genocide or some kind of attempt at a genocide has happened here.
Yeah, I think this is like the 1948 Geneva Convention and then the Rome Statute. I don't want to get too much into the international like gobbledygook here, but there is an intent to destroy that's necessary for genocide.
Like a population in part or in whole.
Killing, bodily harm, I think destructive conditions. It's forcibly taking children. And then the last one is stopping births.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sterilizing.
Basically. And it's like you run through that list. You run through that list and you're like, well, shit. I mean, the issue, though, is, whether you believe it or not, it's like it's looking at a historic set of circumstances and conditions. And I think it's one thing to make a genocide argument about the way that Canada has treated Indigenous peoples, but often where there ends up being pushback is then its contemporary sort of instantiation. Like the way that these things have been reproduced historically. So in 2019, when Justin Trudeau said that the way Canada had treated missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls amounted to a genocide, two of the old white guy genocide voices in this country, Romeo Dallaire and Irwin Cotler, like two of the big names in the room, were both like, this is not right. They thought that minimized the definition of genocide because they said, like, this is unconscionable what's happening, but the intent to destroy for them was not there. And I think that's...
But it's all over, like, the government documents, right? Like, killing the child or killing the Indian to save the child. It's in the way we separate the families. It's in the way we take the children. It's in the way that we've allocated this territory that doesn't belong to us. But you see, that's the more expansive definition that the PPT is looking at. This was, I think, a more narrow subject matter. So they were able to point at it and say, like, it doesn't meet the standards for us. So I think what the PPT is trying to do is say, like, we haven't had like a real, I think, broad-based acknowledgement that a genocide occurred, and that's what they're trying to get at. It's just like rethinking the approach to this problem, because like right now we do have these names in the room who are like, this is not a genocide, and it's not the right people necessarily who are getting the attention to make that call, or who are setting the agenda for what's being spoken about. Well, I really appreciate that you took the time to go and that you came on the show, and thanks for talking about this.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.